Now, it's the Michele Tafoya Podcast.
Jenny Holland, it's great to have you. I am a fan of your work, and it's interesting. You're living over there in Ireland with your son.
Yes.
You're an American also.
Yes.
I'm guessing you have dual citizenship, yeah?
I do. Which is fantastic.
Yeah, it is. And your perspective is really interesting. And the stuff you write, it demonstrates that. All right, so let me read a couple lines at the beginning of your piece in praise of ordinary men. You said, a few weeks ago, I was scrolling mindlessly on Instagram, my number one favorite way to relax, when I came upon the following quote. De Beauvoir told us the reason women can't see our oppression is because, unlike other minority groups, we live lives entirely entwined with our oppressors and it all seems normal. I save the post because it is such a perfect summation of why I am not, nor ever really have been, a feminist. Explain that. What do you mean?
I think feminism appeals to young women in particular, because I think every human, men and women alike, go through that youthful phase of lack of wisdom and lack of understanding of human nature and human behavior and your own behavior. And I think feminism does that, but also then adds this idea that women are perpetual victims. And that's never, ever been my reality. From the minute and hour I can remember, the men in my family and the men in my life were they just weren't oppressors. And I would look around me and I didn't really see any oppressors either. Now, that's not to deny the very real history of violence. And I say that in that piece. And my father, who was quite a well-known Irish writer, he actually literally wrote the book on misogyny. And I've read it. It's a fantastic book. It's not that misogyny doesn't exist. It's that to flatten it all out and to say that men are the oppressors and women are the oppressed, and specifically women are oppressed because of our bodies and our biologies, just doesn't reflect reality. I think human relationships, especially the interdependency between a man and a woman, is so much more complex than that. And there's moments where a man will be more powerful and there's moments when a woman will be more powerful. That's always been my experience. I think women have a set of tools that render men quite helpless. And I'm not talking about sexy times. I'm talking about we have emotional arsenal that men really can't fight back against the majority of times. And maybe it's just I grew up with a lot of real powerful and ball busting women, but which is definitely possible. I mean, that was my reality. But even in my mom's family, my mother is one of 7 girls and 3 boys. And their father was extremely devout Catholic. He would what we would call now a trad Catholic. They lived in accordance to the sort of doctrine of holy poverty. And he was very, if there was ever a patriarch, it would have been my grandfather. And yet he was completely run roughshod by the fact that he had 7 daughters who, grew up in the 60s, and everyone turned into a hippie, and everyone stopped going to church. And I mean, it just is not as simple as saying that women's bodies and women have been only oppressed. Men have also been oppressed. Men's bodies have also been co-opted. Men's bodies have been brutalized. Men's bodies have been abused and enslaved for sexual reasons and for labor, mostly for labor. And we just completely write that off and pretend like it never happened. It's funny because and I've always been an atheist, my whole life I've been an atheist, but I recently started reading a little bit of the Bible. And it had never struck me before, but when Eve eats the fruit and God says that your punishment will be labor pains, that's always referenced, right, by the inherent, as an example of the inherent misogyny of
right.
religion. But what does he say to Adam? Your punishment is you will toil in the fields. Men and women have been working and suffering in tandem, hand in hand throughout humanity. To say that it's only women and women have a particularly hard time. I just don't think it's entirely fair. We have a hard time in very unique ways that men don't experience, but men also suffer, and they also suffer great injustice.
And what do you? Men suffer great injustice?
Yeah. Yes, they have.
Go ahead. What are you
Well,
specifically referring to?
I think that, and this goes back to the sort of our social justice warrior takeover of dominant culture. We forget that men have been used as cannon fodder. Men have been used as, indentured servitude and backbreaking labor, and that all of our creature comforts that we all enjoy now rest literally on the labor of men. And a few years ago, if you're going back, you might remember during Me Too and just before Me Too, there was a lot of this stuff about the women's emotional labor and how suddenly we're supposed to be paid or somehow compensated for having to explain things to men. I'm like, well, okay. I mean, I get that. I've done that many times. I understand that's frustrating, but I'd rather have emotional labor than breaking rocks or, laying a railroad track.
You brought up labor pains for women, and I read recently that there is this effort to grow babies in plastic bags, essentially. That I think it was done with a sheep or a lamb, that they managed to put an embryo in a, I say plastic bag, you get the idea, in some sort of replacement for a uterus. And young ladies were asked, young women, God, hope I didn't offend anyone by saying ladies, young women were asked about this, what they thought of it. And some young women said, finally, we'll be equal to men. We don't have to give birth. To me, that's so, first of all, you're avoiding pain in one of the most unbelievable acts that a woman can perform, that a human can perform. Yeah. And you're doing this to level the playing field.
It's insane.
I mean, this is part of what nature determined women can do, and women have the honor and the privilege of doing. I've given birth. You've given birth. I wouldn't say it was easy, but I certainly wouldn't trade it for anything. What do you make of this idea that people want such? It's almost as though they want to erase any differences between men and women.
Right. It's the idea itself is so dystopian and horrifying, and that's one thing. It truly is the stuff of nightmares. Yeah. What's demoralizing is that we have somehow raised a generation of young women to think that that's a good thing, and not a huge threat to humankind, but first and foremost us. Because I think, let's just say culture, let's not blame anyone for this, but what culture seems to have done is it's taken this idea that, women weren't allowed to vote, and we weren't allowed to have property, and we weren't allowed to get divorced, and all these genuine injustices, right? And they've built this narrative on top of that, which is women are chattel, and we because of our role as wives and mothers, those were the centers of our oppression, and we need to throw that away so that we can be liberated to go work in a corporate job. Okay, whatever. Obviously, that makes no sense, but that seems to have really taken root. That idea seems to have really taken root, and nothing wrong with working. Trust me, it's great. I loved it. It's a wonderful thing to do. Yes. But this idea that women's biology is oppressive is not just incorrect. It's misogyny. It is misogynistic. Somehow women have we've allowed ourselves to be told that, what is actually our greatest strength is our greatest weakness. It's like this crazy mind trick that's been played on an entire generation, if not two, of women. We've also taken away the sense of any kind of traditional parenting, any kind of like common sense parenting, so that women, young women and girls even are given this idea that being a mother is just so hard, and you have to give up everything about your life and everything about yourself and in service to this horrible little tyrant that just like makes noise all the time and never is grateful. And I always think it's like the same if you constantly have problems with men, and if you constantly have problems with your children, maybe you need to check some attitudes and lay down the law. We have
it might not be them.
It might not be them. And especially with children, children are so fun. They're fantastic. They're amazing. They're fascinating. But if they're behaving like little jerks, you have it in your power to correct that behavior. Suddenly, like American society, almost as a whole, and I'm generalizing here, but it's definitely reflected in films and television shows of like these like perplexed parents who don't know how to do anything. I think it's actually extremely damaging, and
I agree.
people will think I'm being hyperbolic, I'm exaggerating, I'm saying this for effect, but I genuinely believe that lack of parental authority, that loss of parental authority and parental wisdom is directly led us to where we are now, where almost all of our institutions, if not all of our institutions, at least from the outside, look extremely corrupt, look extremely incompetent, and society seems to be falling apart at the seams. And I really think you can trace that back to the loss of parental, like common sense parental authority in the home.
That's a really interesting notion. There was another woman somewhere in the UK who wrote a piece about child-led parenting. In other words, the parents let the child lead. And she tried it for a little while and she realized, wow, this isn't working very well. I mean, if you let the child lead, the child's brain is not developed. We have so many contradictions. We have so many contradictions about a child and his or her brain. First of all, we think the child knows if it's transsexual as a toddler.
Right.
I don't know how we can.
So
that's
sinister.
Nonsense. It is. And okay, so let's drill down on that for a minute, because this is a phenomenon that's really exploding here in the post-COVID lockdown era. That this whole notion of transgenderism has suddenly exploded. Now, you if you're a transgender, fine, live your life. But how do we explain this sudden, just exponential growth of trans youth? And I don't know, certainly in America, I don't know if you see it worldwide, but how would you explain it?
Well, lockdowns were a key factor, but I think it's really important to say, first of all, that we're all throwing about this term transgender as if it's one thing. It's the same as like being gay, being sexually oriented towards the same sex. But transgender is not one type. It's not one thing. It's an umbrella term that encompasses, 10-year-old girls, 11, 12-year-old girls. It encompasses, younger boys, 6, 7, 8, who maybe are quite feminine and probably grow up to be gay. And it encompasses grown ass men who married and had children and suddenly in middle age decide that they're women. I don't see what a man in his 50s who decides that he wants to become a woman has in common with an 11-year-old girl or a 12-year-old girl who may or may not be on the spectrum, who is terrified of the physical changes that her body is going through as a result of puberty. Those two people have nothing in common as far as I'm concerned. But we've been sold this idea that it's all one thing and we have to be completely accepting of it because it's better to let a 12-year-old or a 13 or 14, 15, 16-year-old girl cut off her breasts, and boys do even worse things. So it's better to do that than risk not accepting or not validating someone's idea of themselves. Again, lack of common sense. I mean, there's a great Instagrammer called Becky Weiss, and she's a single mom and a lesbian, and she's a fitness, like a personal trainer. And she did this great reel where she was just like, okay, you know what you say? You say no. You just say no. If your child comes to you at 10 years old and says this thing, I think I need to take this course, you just say no. You're not doing that. I think one of the reasons we see a lot of young, like teenagers and younger kids adopting this ideology is because during lockdown, everyone was online all the time. And this is an online driven phenomenon, not so much with the older men, although that too is driven by online subcultures, which I don't want to get into because they're so grotesque. But they're dark, they're dark. But with kids, these kids became accustomed to living entirely online. And I think they and their families lost touch with reality a little bit. Sorry, that's my
Don't
dog.
worry. Yeah, we get this all the time, and we love hearing from the other voices. Are you losing your hair? Is it thinning? Are you worried? Does it run in the family? Look, don't think you're alone, because there are millions of American men and women who are right in the same ballpark as you are. But finally, there's a real solution that delivers on what it promises, without chemicals, without harsh side effects, without unpleasant smells. And it's called Provia. And it's brought to us by the good folks that developed Genucell skincare, which I used religiously. Provia uses a safe, natural ingredient, Procapil, to effectively target the three main causes of premature hair thinning and loss by supporting healthy scalp circulation, the delivery of nourishing nutrients, and healthy hair follicle anchoring to your scalp. Provia guarantees more hair on your head than in the drain or in your comb. This is effective for men and women of any age. It's safe on colored hair, styled hair, treated hair. It's really that simple. And right now, new customers save over 50% off Provia's introductory package on proviahair.com, Provia hair.com/Michele. Every package includes a full 60-day supply of Provia serum for daily use, plus Provia 30 super concentrate for faster, more noticeable results. Provia works, guaranteed, or 100% of your money back. I mean, it's that simple. So get results for yourself right now. See what it can do for you. Don't wait. Proviahair.com/Michele. Provia hair.com/Michele with one L. Proviahair.com/Michele.
Kids are living online, and I know, kids are living online, and there was a lot of loneliness and fear in the ether because of lockdowns, and kids are impressionable. Kids are very impressionable and vulnerable to adults and other older kids who are presenting themselves as these cool people who have all these like friends and because also I think kids are being taught in school, but they're taught too much about emotions and about feelings.
Yeah.
So having your feelings validated all of a sudden is the most important thing in the world, where it's really not.
No.
And that's not a very good lesson to teach children. But that's a very prevalent idea on Instagram. And I think it's also coming in from the wider culture and from education systems as well. And it's a terrible idea.
It is. And this is not why we send our kids to school, to deal with their feelings. That's for the home. That's for the family that you mentioned earlier. I just want to underscore something. You said you're an atheist?
Well, I always was, and I'm wavering. I'm definitely wavering.
Well, but I want to point out that your perspectives are not coming from some Christian evangelical point of view. You're wavering, you're thinking, you're considering. You've started reading the Bible, which is really interesting to me because I've kind of started to dabble in it myself. I think that there is nothing wrong with being either atheist or a believer. But what I do think is that happiness is really key to people's lives, to people's well-being, and however you find it. I've seen some of the poorest people on planet Earth being some of the happiest. And I've seen some of the richest people on planet Earth being the most miserable. There are other things that make people happy outside of the material world. And I think that's really important. But you're coming at this subject of transgenderism, not from some place of right-wing Christianity. That's not where you're coming at it from. And I think that really makes your view of this maybe more accessible to a lot of people.
Probably not, to be honest. I think it would make me it would just make me an apostate and worthy of burning even more because I dare to.
I don't think you're worthy of burning. I think you're incredibly smart. One of the things that I have a problem with right now with all of this transgenderism and accepting the feelings and so forth, it's actually right now, it's gone beyond acceptance. It's gone to glamorizing.
Oh yeah.
So, Drew Barrymore on her talk show the other day had on a trans woman who is so over the top and was complaining about how tough it is to be a woman. And Drew Barrymore got on her knees and knelt and hugged this person. Okay, so this glorification of this. We see advertisers high-end fashion designers using models who have clearly had double mastectomies, in their, with the stitches showing in their ads.
Yeah.
So this has gone beyond just acceptance and
Yes.
maybe opening
Yes.
the discussion wider.
Yep.
I think it's being glorified. What do you think?
It's not just being glorified, it's being mandated. It's being made, it's being codified. So it's now not just culturally and socially unacceptable to say what reality is. You, in some cases, it's downright illegal. Women in the United Kingdom get knocks on the door from the police if they misgender someone or say something mean to someone on Twitter on the gender issue, because it's considered a hate crime. Thankfully, where you guys are, obviously you still have the right to free speech, in the Constitution. We don't have that here. So families are being torn apart by, in case of social services stepping in. I mean, there's some really nightmare scenarios playing out across the English-speaking world as regards this issue. So it's not just acceptance. It's not just glorification. It is both of those things, but it's gone beyond that to a extremist adaptation of this, to the point where you are being forced by law and law enforcement to accept it. And it's a very scary reality. I find it hard to really fully believe that things have gotten that crazy, but it seems that they have. I think the only way to really, fight back, I suppose, is probably a little bit of a grandiose term, but the only way to even try and gain some ground back is just simply to say no, and I am going to state reality. So like Dylan Mulvaney is not a woman and never will be and never has been. Dylan Mulvaney is has a right to convince himself that he is one, but he isn't one. And more upsetting to me is that Drew Barrymore, who was such a figure of my childhood, is the same age as me, is going around and genuflecting to this religion. I mean, that's what it's become. It's the orthodoxy is so extreme, it is on par with a religion. But I lived in New York in the 1980s, and I remember the rise of the Christian right, and I remember all that. I remember Reagan's presidency. Never ever did this kind of insanity, this kind of level of orthodoxy, really impinge upon people coming from the right as much as this is impinging now on people of all political stripes and all religions. I don't know. We just have to stop going along with it. We have to use our words as we tell children,
the issue becomes that other side uses their words back, and they immediately label you homophobe, transphobe, you name it, racist, white supremacist, misogynist, whatever sexist they want to throw at you, they throw it back. I think where we need to not only use our words, but to say to them, no, I'm sorry, that's not what I am. You can label me all you want. Right. I'm not backing down. Absolutely. I mean, those terms now, white supremacy, racism, racist, those are becoming so overly used that they're losing their meaning, which is tragic when you consider what real racism looks like, and Chris Rock put it beautifully when he said, people that say words hurt haven't been punched in the nose. I mean, there's a literal world in which we live, and then there's this world of this madness of people just hurling labels at others to get them to shut up. And in too many cases, it's worked. And we need enough of us now. We need safety in numbers to stop letting it work.
Yeah, 100%. And it's like, people call you names. So what? Like, I feel like this is going back to my idea of parenting. I mean, obviously, a lot of people get really canceled and their lives are destroyed. I'm not dismissing that reality. But when some person I don't know on Facebook or on Twitter tells me I'm a right-wing, Christian fascist, I'm like, I don't give hoot what you think of me. I don't. So work, have at it, like work away,
Right.
like unload. It doesn't matter because I know it's not true. We're going back to this parenting idea that kind of really took root in the 80s, which is like, nobody can harm this little person. Oh my God. And everything has to be, and, no more bullying. And obviously no more bullying is a good idea. But then we've completely stripped people of the ability to defend themselves and to stand up for themselves, because they've never had to do it when they were 6. So now we have all these 35-year-olds running around now who can't cope. Maybe I'm just a total battle axe, but like, I just don't think that, that was ever a healthy idea. And it really seems to define the discourse. And the problem is that all that kind of, that be nice and be kind. And I mean, it's being used as a mask to hide the very opposite of that, to hide absolutely no mercy, no humanity, no generosity. Like the people who are pushing these ideologies. So, either whether it's CRT, white children are inherently bad, or, you can choose your gender when you're 2 or whatever it is. Those are anti-human. They're anti-human. And they're the ones running around telling everyone else to be kind. I mean, it really is an obvious kind of like switcheroo. And, I think more and more people can see it.
I hope and pray, and I'm not super religious, but I hope and pray that you are right, that that more and more people are seeing it. Look, I quit a really nice job to start a podcast in which I'm just scraping by here, to elevate voices like yours, to elevate ideas like the ones you've articulated here, because it is so damn important. I feel like we're losing our sanity here.
We are, yeah.
And I don't want to be around for us when we go really off the cliff. I want to save us from going off the cliff, because we're really, really right on the edge right now as a society, as the Western world. And so this is why I want to elevate your Substack, Jenny Holland. So many incredibly well-written pieces, interesting, makes you think, and common sense. And I just love it. And I hope you'll join us again, because I'd love to have more discussions with you. That you are really, you've got a great perspective and a really interesting point of view from where you sit. Sitting over there in Ireland. You're in Ireland, and
yes,
go have a pint and with your husband, and we will talk to you again. I truly hope so. This has been great.
I really appreciate you asking me on. I've had a lot of fun.
Great. We'll do it again. She is Jenny Holland. You can find her at Substack. Saving Culture from Itself is the title of her Substack, and it is tremendously worth looking at every time she writes. Thanks for listening, everyone. This has been Sideline Sanity. And as Jenny and I have tried to impart to you here today, the things I always say: be brave and do good. Thanks for listening.